Technology and culture evolve much more rapidly than other layers of cities, namely government. And this goes back, for example, if you look at the famous shearing layers diagrams of Frank Duffy about how buildings evolve, where, of course, the foundations, the earth is the slowest thing to change, then the structures, and then, of course, inside of that you have various systems down to the furniture moves much more rapidly, which is lessons for co-working. Most of the time when it comes to the fact that government evolves more slowly than technology and culture, I personally think that is a good thing. Government, of course, is there to work for all of us and to protect people as well as enable us further. But I think when it comes to thinking about economic development, and particularly in the age of remote work and what we have available to us, government is a bit stuck in the past. So what I want to talk today about is about how do we think about perhaps reinventing some of those city government functions and state level. I won't touch the feds, but let's look at both city and state level to rethink about how you can basically enable these people. Because, when you think about government workers today, this is exactly what you imagine if you're fans of Everything Everywhere All at Once. Jamie Lee Curtis playing the ultimately, ultimately helpful and ultimately understanding government employee. But here, I love those awards in the background. If you've seen the film, you know how those come into play. But I want to talk today about this idea of the nomadic city, a city that is designed to encourage new arrivals, rather than thinking about the ongoing problems of brain drain. I think it's endlessly fascinating when I talk to cities and regions in my work that it's the constant concern about how do we keep young people to stay. Well, it's this notion of how do we think about how do we bring people in, how do we turn tourists, how do we turn those visitors into permanent residents, and how do we build the supporting scaffolding and structure to make this possible at scale. So let's start with traditional economic development. I don't know how much the people in the room know about this process because it is by design very much a black box. 10 years ago, for example, I was on the phone with Larry Morrissey, who was then the mayor of Rockford, Illinois. I'm from Illinois, and if you know Rockford, it's about a city about 150,000 people, 400,000 metro, half the size of Tulsa. But Larry Morrissey was fed up with economic development. And it's a dark art. You can read magazines like Site Selection, for example. In traditional corporate economic development, cities and states produce these kinds of documents and go to companies and basically offer shovel-ready brownfield sites, tax abatements, offers to connect to highways, and they hope to get, a few dozen jobs. Like literally, for example, Axios in their AI newsletter today mentioned that Columbus, Ohio, the state capital, one of the fastest growing cities in the Midwest, recently gave Microsoft a 15-year tax abatement on a $420 million data center that will create a grand total of 30 jobs. Like, this is what Morrissey was upset about. And he swore to me on this call that he was no longer going to go sit in some hotel ballroom and basically beg companies to build warehouses in his town or data centers today. And instead, he was going to Chicago and he was going to try to recruit a 6-person artisanal shoe company, because this was 2014 and artisanal shoemaking was still really big then. But it was this idea. And of course, economic development also traditionally is, yes, states on states, cities on cities, a race to the bottom in terms of who can give away the store the most, and the sort of interregional conflict. And the ultimate example of this, the pinnacle and the nadir, was, of course, Amazon HQ2 back in 2018. Again, I'm from Kankakee, Illinois, which is about an hour south of Chicago, and Kankakee's proposal was to literally give them Amazon City. They were going to give them unincorporated land, hand them an airport, the local airport, and basically give Amazon carte blanche. And that still, of course, wasn't enough. Amazon, of course, did this to over 280 municipalities around the United States, and in the end, picked the 2 places it wanted to go. New York City, where residents like myself were appalled that we were going to give them $3 billion in tax breaks to move to a place they were already going to move to, and Arlington, Virginia, where they did break ground on this, and then paused the project, because despite Andy Jassy's efforts to get everyone back into the office, they can't, and so that entire project is stalled. So you can sort of see where the real dead end of this development actually lands there. And so we see, obviously, we're all here today because there's this new emerging model. Rather than throwing tax breaks after companies to beg them to relocate jobs, effectively by force, can we actually become attractors? How do we attract individual talent and win the battle for hearts and minds? Now, Tulsa Remote, of course, is the oldest, the most successful of this. There are others, and many popped up to various degrees during the pandemic. Probably the next closest to this is Northwest Arkansas, home of Bentonville and Fayetteville, backed by the Waltons in a similar way that the Kaiser family is here. And there, of course, they famously offer, if you know the whole background of this, they offer not just $10,000 to relocate, but $10,000 on a mountain bike, because they're very proud of their mountain biking there. But a smaller one was the Savannah Economic Development Authority during the pandemic, and they're very emblematic of many small ones I spoke to, where in 2020, of course, with travel being grounded, they took their leftover travel budgets and used to pop up a similar program, which attracted, I think, 50 people that year, including, I think they were proud, they got some Facebook product managers, for example, there. But that was also, of course, interesting because Savannah, like Tulsa and many other smaller cities around the United States, has a unique heritage, culture, history, building typology, and they were able to sell that to individuals.